For decades, television brought millions of American viewers to share major turning points in U.S. history, from the Kennedy assassination and the moon landing to the O.J. Simpson murder trial and the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Even now, the Nielsen Ratings Company reported 33.8 million people watched the 2021 inauguration of 46th President Joe Biden at some point during the 6-hour televised celebration carried on 17 networks. In this chapter, we will examine television's impact on American life, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, starting with the early history of television. Inspired by the ability to transmit audio signals from one place to another, inventors sought a way to send televisual images. In 1885, German scientist Paul Nipkow patented a scanning disc, a large, flat metal disc perforated with small holes organized in a spiral pattern. As the disc rotated, it separated pictures into pinpoints of light that could be transmitted as a series of electronic lines. The Nipkow disc would eventually be used in the televisions through the 1920s and 1930s. Television's developmental stage continued into the 1920s with two competing inventors, Russian Vladimir Zworykin and American teenager Philo Farnsworth. After immigrating to the United States and taking a job at RCA, Zworykin invented the iconoscope, the first TV camera tube to convert light rays into electrical signals. Around the same time, young Farnsworth transmitted the first electronic TV picture by rotating a straight line scratched on a square of painted glass by 90 degrees. RCA accused Farnsworth of patent violation, a case which Farnsworth ultimately won, using drawings he had shared with his high school science teacher as evidence. Farnsworth also conducted the first public demonstration of television at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia in 1934, 5 years before RCA's much more famous public demonstration at the 1939 World's Fair. The opening ceremony and events at the fair were televised, and NBC began regularly scheduled broadcasts. President Franklin Roosevelt dedicated the fair, thereby becoming the first president to be televised. As TV moved into the entrepreneurial stage in the late 1930s, the National Television Systems Committee began outlining industry-wide manufacturing practices and defining technical standards. Then, in 1941, the FCC adopted an analog standard based on radio waves for all U.S. television sets, which at the time could only display black and white images. About 30 other countries adopted this system, though most of Europe and Asia eventually adopted a system with slightly better image quality and resolution. In 1948, only 1% of American households had a television set. By 1953, more than 50% had one, and by the early 1960s, they were in more than 90% of homes. The 1950s marked television's arrival as a mass medium. Analog TV signals are part of the same electromagnetic spectrum that carries light waves and radio signals. The audio for Channel 6 was accessible at 87.7 on radio dials. When I moved to North Carolina in 2006, I remember driving through West Virginia and listening to an episode of the TV series Will and Grace on my radio. This ended in 2009, though, when television officially switched from analog to digital. In the early days of television, the number of broadcast TV stations in a geographic area was limited to avoid interference. In 1952, after years of licensing freezes due to World War II, the FCC created a national map in which it attempted to evenly distribute all available channels throughout the country. By the mid-1950s, the nation had more than 400 television stations in operation. Keep in mind, only a handful were available in any given area, though. In 1954, RCA's color system was adopted as the national standard. The FCC had tentatively approved a color system developed by CBS, but the signal could not be received by black and white sets. RCA system, in contrast, sent TV images in color, but allowed older sets to receive the images in black and white. Color TV sets were expensive, though, and it wasn't until the 1966-67 television season that all three major TV networks broadcast their primetime lineups in full color. Sales of colored television sets wouldn't surpass those of black and white until 1972. Growing up in the 1980s, my family had a small black and white TV in the basement. My brothers and I regularly watched when the bigger color TV upstairs was occupied. As a mass medium, television had become big business, and broadcast networks wanted increased control over its content. As with radio during the 1930s and 1940s, early television programs were developed, produced, and supported by a single sponsor, such as Kodak's sponsorship of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet and Colgate's The George Burns Show. Oftentimes, the sponsor's name would be right in the title, like Pat Boone Chevrolet Showroom, Coke Time with Eddie Fisher, and Texaco Star Theater, The Milton Berle Show. This arrangement gave the companies that controlled brand name products extensive power over what was shown on television. But newly emerging broadcast TV networks wanted more control over their own content and, using several strategies, set out to diminish sponsor and ad agency influence. One strategy was to increase the cost to sponsor a television program. Sylvester "Pat" Weaver, president of NBC from 1953 to 1955, and, fun fact, father of actress Sigourney Weaver, increased program length from 15 minutes, which was the standard for radio programs, to a full half hour. This naturally raised program costs for advertisers, discouraging some from sponsoring programs. At first, it might seem counterintuitive to drive away advertising dollars, but as Weaver has explained, most people don't realize that all the networks really were just facilities and had nothing to do with programming at the time. Given that context, Weaver's decision makes a lot more sense. NBC also introduced a new program type, the magazine format, which featured multiple segments of news, talk, comedy, and music. New programs Today and The Tonight Show are two of the longest-running programs on NBC. By airing daily rather than weekly, the magazine format show made studio production costs much more prohibitive for a single sponsor. Thus, instead of sponsoring a whole 30 minutes, an advertiser would pay the network for 30 or 60-second time slots during the show. Now the network, not the sponsor, owned such programs or bought them from independent producers. Another of Weaver's contributions to early television was the idea of a television spectacular. Now more reasonably called a television special, it's a standalone TV show that temporarily interrupts regular programming, like decades of Bob Hope Christmas shows and a 1955 TV version of Peter Pan that drew over 65 million viewers. From an economic standpoint, a TV special allowed networks to sell ad spots to multiple advertisers. One of the most popular programs of the 1950s was the quiz show. They were, and still are, cheap to produce, with inexpensive sets and amateurs as guests. For each show, a corporate sponsor such as Revlon or Geritol prominently displayed its name on the set throughout the program. According to PBS's American Experience, when CBS premiered the $64,000 question in 1955, the show was the biggest TV hit to date, attracting 47 million viewers in 10 weeks. Audiences couldn't get enough of people just like them, competing for huge sums of money by answering tough questions. At the time these shows aired, crime rates and movie theater attendance actually dropped. Except it wasn't real. Initially, popular contestants were given easier questions and rehearsed with the show's producers prior to airtime. Eventually, the producer of the show 21 began providing contestants with the answers before airtime. The producer even coached his hand-picked winners on how to answer the questions to generate the most suspense for viewers. The most popular contestant, Charles Van Doren, had a winning streak that earned him $129,000, the equivalent of well over $1 million today. A congressional investigation revealed the rigging of 21 and other popular game shows. Audiences felt angry and betrayed. The scandal magnified the separation between the powerful companies that sponsored programs and the general public. 21 sponsored Geritol was partially to blame by demanding changes after a lackluster show debut in which uncoached contestants couldn't answer many of the questions. After the scandal, networks further decreased the use of sponsors to create programs. The Communications Act of 1934 was amended to prohibit the fixing of quiz shows, and quiz shows virtually disappeared from primetime network television, eventually reappearing some 40 years later as game shows with a shifted focus from knowledge to puzzles and word games. Despite the tarnished reputation of the quiz show scandal, broadcast television continued to grow in popularity in the 1950s, but not for everyone. Some communities were unable to receive traditional broadcast TV signals because of geographical isolation or because of mountains or tall buildings blocking transmission. The first small cable systems, called Community Antenna Television, or CATV, were put in place in Oregon, Pennsylvania, and New York City in the late 1940s to help solve these problems. New cable companies ran wires from relay towers that brought in broadcast signals from far away. The cable companies then strung wire from utility poles and sent the signals to individual homes, stimulating demand for TV sets in those communities. Early CATV systems served about 10% of the country, as the rest were able to readily access broadcast television. But cable offered several advantages over broadcast TV. First, because each channel was routed in a separate wire, it eliminated any over-the-air interference. Second, because CATV ran signals through coaxial cable, it had the option of adding more channels. Initially, CATV communities received 12 channels, about twice as many channels as were available over the air in much larger cities. Growing up, I can count 6 channels I was able to watch on broadcast TV. Eventually, the cable industry would pose a major competitive threat to conventional broadcast television.